Alright guys, welcome back to RC Mojo and our MC8 build. In the last video we got the cab finished. Today we're going to get the electronics properly fitted and fit the now painted load bed. Right, first up, the rear lights. Hopefully, if you watched the last video, you'll have painted the back of the LEDs to stop any light leakage. If you did and they're dry, we can move on. Feed the connectors through the hole in chassis and pull most of the wiring through. I'm going to put a smear of GWS glue on the LEDs before fitting them, just so if they get snagged the LEDs will have a bit of grip, so they shouldn't come out quite so easily. If you don't have any of the GWS glue, some good old Yoo-hoo pour will do the trick just as well. Insert the LEDs from the back, yellow on the outside, red in the middle and white on the inside. Press them in so they're fully seated. Now the fun bit, getting the lenses in. They're a really tight fit and they don't need any glue, as once they're in, the only way they're going to come out is by pushing them out through the LED mounting holes. Be patient with them, you need to get them in straight or they'll catch on the edges. Rinse and repeat on the other side. You can bend the LED legs a bit and smooth down the wiring to the mount. Just don't bend them around too much or you'll break the legs and you'll have some soldering to do. The rest of the wiring can be laid along the chassis rails, where you'll be using these little widgets. Some nice little nylon cable clips, well chosen as they fit perfectly inside the chassis rails, and the wiring can lay flat inside the clip. Nice! Make a note of how many you have. Put the first one an inch or so up from the hole the wire goes through the chassis. The rest get fitted as you need to. The gearbox is a bit of a pain to get over, but quite doable while keeping it looking fairly tidy. The front mounts I put on top of the cross member just before the electronics box. Keeps everything out of the way and nice and tidy. And speaking of the electronics box, to make it a bit more discreet, it's now black. Here's the light controller. I'm going to try and get it all in the box. It's going to be a tight fit, but it might go in. We shall see. If you carefully fitted the LEDs, keeping track of the labels, you should just need to plug each connector into its labelled position. The steering servo and ESC need to be plugged into the controller parallel with the short servo cable already fitted. This essentially works like a Y lead, splitting the power and signal between the connected devices. The short cables then just get plugged into the receiver. Quite a nice layout, I like it. Does mean though that the LEDs are going to be powered through the BEC, so make sure your ESCs or external BEC has the headroom. With a bit of tucking and packing, the wiring all goes in. A couple of zip ties for the motor wires so they don't flap around too much, and the chassis is basically done. Now for the hard part. We need to hook up the cab wiring to the controller, which is easier said than done. If you lay the cab down in front of the chassis, you can just about get the connectors through the hole in the front of the box and plug them in. It's a right fiddle there. Methinks there's got to be a better way. See how this pans out first though. When they're all in, you can pop the lid on the box, flip the cab around and fit the front screws and washers. And remember of course not to do them up too tight as it's a hinge point. Okay, let's connect up the battery and see if it works. Servo centered, throttle, headlights, indicators. Yep, sweet. That's the cab installed, so we might as well pop the load bed on. When I painted it, I masked off the slot for the boxes. Again, always plan ahead. Makes life so much easier. The rails on the boxes were also masked, so we should just need some plasti weld in the slot and the box can be pressed in. Simple. Same of course on the other one. They'll need 10 or 15 minutes to harden up, but then we can pop the bed on the chassis. Because we built it and we were really careful getting it all aligned, it sits on the rails perfectly. All the screw holes are spot on. Nice. That of course gets held on with the M3 screws and washers. Now the side and rear panels can go on and all the screws fitted, of which there are many. Fuel cans in. Again, because we were careful during the build, they fit perfectly. And well, that's about it for the stock build. The manual has some sticky back velcro on the top of the electronics box for the battery, but I'm planning on a large 2S LiPo at some point, mounted between the chassis rails further back. For now, some rubber bands around the lid on the electronics box will do the job and not mark up the paint. This seems like a good place to end the video, but it's a bit early I think. So let's have a quick look at the first mod, a breakout board and loom to let the LED controller be mounted outside of the electronics box, actually far enough away that it fits in the side of the cab. The goal here is to move the controller somewhere where it won't get in the way, and to have the LED connection somewhere we can easily get to them. The first thing I made was this distribution board. It splits the LED connections to the chassis and the cab, with the 3 connections that connect to the receiver. It makes it all look nice and tidy. The next bit to look at is the loom that connects the board to the controller. If we count up the total connections that normally connect to the controller, we have 24 for the LEDs and 9 for the radio. That's quite a lot of wires. There's a cheat we can use due to the way the controller is laid out on its PCB. First, the LED power pins, the one that goes to the red wires, are all connected together in parallel. It's the LED grounds that get switched by the processor. You may consider taking 1 or 2 wires from the LED power pins, then distributing it at the other end. But you can go further. The LED power pins get their power from the receiver, so you don't even need any of those LED power pins at all. So that's 33 down to 21. Far more manageable. We can go further. The radio connections have signal, power and ground. And not surprisingly, the power and grounds are in parallel. Since the power connection will only be powering the processor on the controller board, we can knock out a further 2 wires. That takes us down to 19. That's quite a reduction. You may be tempted to cut down the ground connections too, but remember that's ground reference for the signals, the ground for the processor, and the LEDs will be syncing their current too. So it's good to keep all 3 wires. Having said that, I just use standard servo wire soldered directly to the distribution board with a standard servo connector at the other end. A bit more bulk than strictly necessary, but not by much. The last part of the puzzle are the Y leads, for steering and the throttle channels. Again, to reduce bulk, I've not used normal long Y leads, I made up these little compact ones. So yeah, much neater install. There's some breathing room in the electronics box now, which is nice. This is of course an interim solution. I've got an 8-channel radio with custom processing I've been working on and off for a good few months. But that's a long way off being field ready, and as I always say, it's more fun to upgrade bit by bit than just going all out from the beginning. For the curious, I'll stick a link in the description that shows part of the system. The audio module is all open source, by the way. Well, that fills some time, so that'll do it I think. Please like if you liked, consider subscribing if you're not already, and of course, thanks for watching. Bye guys.